The night was calm in the little village outside Lagos. Crickets sang in the distance as Aisha stood to leave her grandmother's house. She was halfway to the door when Grandma Folake reached out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Her hand was cold, her fingers trembling. "Don't go home," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the night. Aisha froze, startled by the fear in her grandmother's eyes. Folake was known in the family for her odd warnings, and most people laughed them off. But this time felt different. The whisper cut straight into Aisha's chest, making her heart race. She hesitated on the doorstep, torn between ignoring what sounded like another strange warning or listening to the unease that crept over her. Just then, the silence of the street shattered. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Aisha's eyes widened as police vans screeched into the road she usually walked home on. Their lights painted the night blue and red, flashing against the walls of her neighborhood. Officers poured out, shouting orders, their boots pounding the ground. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. If she had left minutes earlier, she would have been right in the middle of it all. She stood hidden in the shadows, her grandmother's grip still on her wrist, as the scene unfolded like something from a nightmare. She didn't know what the police were looking for, but one thing was clear: her grandmother's whisper had just saved her life. Grandma Folake had always been the kind of woman people brushed aside. Some called her forgetful, others said she was paranoid. She would warn neighbors about locking their doors at night, or whisper to children not to play too close to certain houses. People smiled politely, nodded, and went back to their lives. Even Aisha sometimes thought her grandmother worried too much. But that night, everything changed. The whisper Folake gave her granddaughter was not the rambling of an old woman. It was sharp, urgent, and it carried a weight that Aisha could feel in her bones. As the rest of the neighborhood slept, Aisha crouched low in the shadows beside her grandmother's house. She could barely breathe as she watched the road ahead explode with flashing lights. Police vans skidded to a stop, their sirens slicing through the calm night. The officers moved fast, jumping out, their heavy boots slamming the ground, their guns raised. The familiar street where she had walked all her life suddenly looked like the set of a crime film. The voices of the police were loud, filled with command and authority, echoing down the street that used to feel safe. Aisha's eyes darted from one van to another, trying to understand what was happening. She wanted to believe this was a mistake, that maybe the police were in the wrong place. But the longer she watched, the clearer it became. They were not lost. They were here for a reason, and that reason was close, too close. Her grandmother's hand rested gently on her shoulder, steadying her even as Aisha's legs shook. Folake didn't speak another word, but her silence said everything. She had known this was coming. She had seen it long before the rest of them. The fear in her eyes was not sudden, it was the kind of fear that had been carried quietly for years, hidden behind tired smiles and hushed prayers. In that moment, Aisha understood. Grandma wasn't paranoid. She wasn't forgetful. She had been warning them all along, but no one had listened. And now here they were, watching a secret unravel in the dead of night. Aisha's heart pounded as she realized that if she had gone home as planned, she would have been standing in the middle of the raid. She would have been trapped in the chaos, swallowed by the flashing lights and barking orders. The sound of doors slamming, people shouting, and heavy boots marching filled the night. Neighbors started peeking from their windows, rubbing their eyes in confusion. Some whispered to each other, trying to piece together the scene. But only Aisha knew the truth: her grandmother had saved her. That one warning, spoken in a trembling whisper, had pulled her back from a danger she couldn't yet name. And as she clung to the shadows, she realized with chilling clarity that Grandma Folake knew something the rest of them didn't. Something buried, something dangerous, something waiting to come out. The road that had always felt so safe, the one Aisha had walked down every day of her life, was no longer the same. That night it turned into something unrecognizable. The quiet lane was swallowed by blinding flashes of blue and red, bouncing off the walls of houses and turning every shadow into something frightening. Police vans blocked the ends of the street, their doors flung open as officers poured out. Their guns were raised, their voices sharp and commanding. The air, once filled with the soft hum of crickets, now carried the heavy sound of boots pounding on the pavement and radios crackling with urgent orders. Aisha stood hidden in the dark, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything like this, not in her village, not on her very street. Every shout from the officers made her heart race faster. The faces of the policemen were hard and focused, as if they knew exactly what they were looking for. This was no random raid. They had come prepared, and Aisha felt a chill run through her body as her eyes followed the direction they were headed, toward her home. She blinked, trying to convince herself she was mistaken. Maybe it was the house next to hers, maybe the police had made a mistake. But as she listened carefully, she realized the chaos was centered on her family's compound. Officers swarmed around it, pointing flashlights, barking orders, forcing doors open. Aisha felt her knees weaken. Her grandmother's whisper echoed in her mind like thunder, "Don't go home." The thought hit her hard, who had told the police to come here? Who had given them a reason to storm her family's house in the middle of the night? And more importantly, what could possibly be inside that made the police arrive with such force, as if they were walking into a battlefield? Neighbors were now awake, peering through windows, stepping onto porches, whispering to one another. Some gasped as they saw guns drawn. Children clung to their mothers, wide-eyed with fear. The street Aisha had known for years, filled with greetings, laughter, and the sound of children running, had turned into a crime scene. Aisha pressed her back against the wall, trembling. She thought of the nights she had played outside, of the mornings she had walked that same road to school, never imagining that one day it would be flooded with flashing lights and armed officers. The fear was no longer just about what was happening in front of her, it was about what it meant. Something dangerous had been living under her roof, hidden in plain sight, and she had been blind to it all along. Her grandmother's grip on her hand tightened, steady and unshaken. Aisha turned to her and saw in her eyes not surprise, but the sadness of someone who had been expecting this night for a long time. And in that moment, Aisha realized the truth, this was not a mistake. Her family's secret had finally been dragged into the light. When the street finally grew quiet and the police had gone, Aisha turned to her grandmother, her voice trembling. "Grandma, what's happening? Why our house?" She searched Folake's face for answers, but the old woman only sighed, her shoulders heavy with a burden she had carried for too long. Her eyes glistened with tears that refused to fall. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with sorrow. Aisha's heart sank. The fear in her grandmother's eyes told her this was not some sudden misunderstanding. This was something that had been waiting in the shadows of their family for years. Folake finally sat down, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. She looked so small and fragile in that moment, but her words carried a weight that shook Aisha to her core. "Your parents," she began slowly, "were not who you thought they were." Aisha's stomach nodded. The room seemed to spin as she leaned closer, desperate to understand. Folake went on, explaining that behind the walls of their modest home had been something dark, something dangerous enough to bring police with guns to their very doorstep. Aisha remembered her childhood, the laughter, the simple meals, the warmth of her parents' presence. But now those memories twisted with doubt. Had there been secrets hidden in the house all along? She thought of the floors she played on, the corners she swept as a child, never knowing what was hidden beneath. And the thought made her shiver. Her grandmother's voice broke as she confessed that she had tried to protect Aisha from the truth. She had hoped the past would stay buried, that the sins of her parents would never catch up to the child they left behind. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. And tonight, under flashing lights and sirens, the truth had finally forced its way out. Aisha stared at her grandmother, her chest tight with confusion and betrayal. She wanted to ask 100 questions, but her throat felt closed. All she could think about was how close she had come to walking into the middle of the raid, into the heart of a crime she didn't even know existed. The thought made her shudder. Folake reached for her granddaughter's hand, her grip steady despite her tears. "I kept quiet for you," she said softly. "So you could grow without this shadow hanging over you. But now you know. And you must be strong." Aisha felt her eyes sting, but she forced herself to hold her grandmother's gaze. She realized her entire life had been built on a silence meant to protect her, a silence that had now shattered. The house she thought was her safe place had been hiding a truth darker than she could ever imagine. And tonight, that truth had finally come alive. By morning the entire village was buzzing. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing toward Aisha Street. News spread fast, moving from one mouth to another like fire on dry grass. The police had arrested someone close to home, someone Aisha had always trusted. She pushed her way through the crowd and then froze, her heart sinking into her stomach. There, in broad daylight for everyone to see, was her uncle, the same man who used to lift her onto his shoulders so she could see the parades, the same man who had bought her sweets when she was little. But now his hands were cuffed behind his back, his face hard and cold as the officers dragged him toward the waiting van. Aisha's chest tightened. The betrayal burned deeper than anything she had ever felt. She had looked up to him her whole life, and now she saw him for who he really was. The laughter and stories he had shared were all a mask. Behind the warmth of family dinners and gentle smiles, there had been something darker, something dangerous that had grown until it spilled into the street for all to witness. The sight of her uncle surrounded by officers was like watching her childhood collapse in front of her eyes. But the worst part wasn't just seeing him taken away. It was realizing her grandmother had known. Aisha glanced at Folake, who stood silently by the doorway, her face heavy with grief but not surprise. This was not shocking news to her, it was a truth she had lived with for years. She had warned him, begged him to change, but he hadn't listened. And now, as the whole world watched, the weight of his choices had fallen on the family. Neighbors shook their heads and muttered under their breath. Some pitied the family, others judged harshly, but Aisha barely heard them. Her mind was racing. She replayed the moments she had shared with her uncle, the jokes, the hugs, the promises. All of it felt poisoned now. How could someone who once protected her be the same person who nearly dragged her into ruin? Folake reached out and touched Aisha's arm gently. Her voice was soft but firm. "I tried to stop him," she said, her eyes glistening with quiet pain. "But he chose this path. And I couldn't let him take you with him." Aisha swallowed hard, her throat dry. She could see the years of heartbreak in her grandmother's face. Folake had carried this secret alone, watching her own son sink deeper into darkness, powerless to save him. The police van's doors slammed shut, echoing through the street. Aisha flinched at the sound. She knew life would never be the same again. The image of her uncle in handcuffs would stay with her forever, not just as a memory of betrayal, but as a warning. She now understood the truth her grandmother had lived with all along. Sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones who break you the most. Folake sat quietly in the corner of the room, her back slightly bent, her face tired from years of carrying secrets. The house felt heavy with silence after the raid, but Aisha's heart was louder than ever, thudding in her chest with questions she didn't know how to ask. At last, her grandmother spoke, her voice low and filled with pain. "I warned him," she said. "I warned him many times. But he never listened." Her words cut through the stillness like a knife. Aisha stared at her, confused. "You mean uncle?" she asked. Folake nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor as if she couldn't bear to see her granddaughter's shock. She explained how she had begged her son for years to leave behind the things he was doing, to walk away from the life that would only end in chains or blood. But every warning was ignored, every tear brushed aside. "He thought he was too smart, too careful," she said, her voice breaking. "But I knew this day would come. Aisha's chest tightened as she listened. She remembered her uncle's laughter, his kindness, and she couldn't understand how it had all been a mask hiding something so dangerous. Then Folake's tone shifted, her voice trembling but strong. She spoke of the moment she saw her son's fear that night, how she noticed the way his eyes darted, desperate, as if he was ready to do anything, even pull Aisha into the mess he had created. That was when Folake made her choice. She could not save her son, not anymore. But she could save her granddaughter. So I whispered to you, she said softly. Not because I was paranoid, but because I wanted you safe. That was the only way I knew to protect you. Aisha felt her throat tighten. She replayed the moment in her mind, the trembling grip on her wrist, the hoarse whisper in her ear. She had thought it was strange, maybe even unnecessary. But now she realized it had saved her life. If she had gone home that night, she would have been swallowed by the chaos, standing in the middle of guns, sirens, and secrets too heavy for her to carry. Tears slipped down Folake's cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. I chose you, she whispered. Even if it meant watching my son fall. Those words pierced Aisha's heart. She realized her grandmother had been standing as the last line of defense, holding back the darkness as long as she could. She had carried the pain of a mother losing her son, yet still found the strength to protect her granddaughter. For the first time, Aisha understood that the whisper in the dark had not been weakness or fear, it had been courage. Her grandmother had sacrificed her peace, her pride, and even her son's trust, just to keep her safe. And in that moment, Aisha knew she owed her life to the woman whose voice had saved her in the night. Aisha stood rooted to the spot, her body trembling as the night unfolded before her eyes. From the shadows, she watched the police tear through the house she had always called home. Flashlights swept across the rooms, voices barked orders, and boots thudded against the floors. She could see officers pulling out boxes, tearing open hidden compartments, dragging out things she never imagined could exist under her roof. Her stomach churned as the truth spilled into the open. Drugs. Bundles of cash. Strange documents. All the things she had only heard about in rumors were now right there, inside her own house, exposed for the world to see. Her heart pounded in her chest. She thought of all the times she had walked barefoot across those same floors, laughing, playing, never once suspecting what lay hidden just beneath her feet. The shock hit her harder than the cold night air. If her grandmother hadn't stopped her, she would have been inside that house when the police stormed in. She would have been trapped, surrounded by evidence that could destroy her life forever. Just the thought of it made her knees weak. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching her chest as if to hold herself together. The chaos around her blurred, but one sound rang clear in her head, the whisper. That trembling, urgent voice of her grandmother telling her not to go home. At the time, it had felt strange, almost confusing. But now, she understood it for what it truly was, a shield, a lifeline, a saving grace. Neighbors were gathering, their eyes wide with disbelief as officers carried evidence out into the street. Some gasped, others whispered, and a few simply shook their heads in silence. Aisha felt their stares pressing down on her, but she kept hidden, too afraid to step into the light. The shame of knowing it was her family's house being raided burned inside her. Yet at the same time, she felt a sharp relief. She had escaped. By nothing more than a whisper, she had been spared from being caught in the same net that had swallowed her uncle. Tears stung her eyes as she thought about how close she had come to losing everything, her freedom, her future, even her name. The weight of it was almost too much to carry. She realized her grandmother had not just saved her from danger that night, she had saved her from being chained to a life that wasn't hers to live. As the last of the officers moved out, shutting the doors behind them, Aisha closed her eyes and let the whisper echo in her heart. It was small, almost fragile, yet it had been powerful enough to pull her back from the edge. That whisper had saved her life, and she knew she would never forget it for as long as she lived. Years passed, but the memory of that night never left Aisha. Sometimes, even in the middle of a busy day, she would hear her grandmother's trembling whisper echo in her ears and feel the same chill run down her spine. That single warning had not only saved her from the chaos of flashing sirens and guns, it had saved her from walking into a future destroyed by secrets she never chose. Every time she thought about it, she realized how close she had come to losing everything. Her grandmother's voice became her guide long after Folake was gone. Aisha carried it with her like a compass, reminding her to stay far from the shadows that had swallowed her uncle. She promised herself she would never repeat the mistakes that had cursed her family for years. She worked harder, kept her circle small, and lived in a way that honored the sacrifice her grandmother had made that night. The whisper was no longer just a memory, it was a lesson, a shield, and a promise. Whenever she shared the story, people leaned in, their eyes wide with disbelief. They struggled to imagine how one soft whisper in the middle of the night could change the course of a life. But Aisha knew better. She had lived it. That single moment, that tiny voice, had been powerful enough to rewrite her destiny. And as she told it, she always ended with the same thought: sometimes the quietest warnings carry the loudest truths, and sometimes a whisper in the dark can save a life forever.